There's Just Something About Kansas City is brought to you by the generosity of our friends with the Haverty family, the Illig family, the Kearney Warnell Foundation, UMB Bank trustee, the Sherman family, the Cockrell family, Kansas City Orthopedic Institute, Don and Mary Doherty, and the Bergman family. Thank you.
Welcome once again to another episode of There's Just Something About Kansas City. We talk about the people, places, and things that make this such a great place to live. And sitting across from me today, the one and only Bob Regnier. He's a former CEO and founder of the Bank of Blue Valley. Now I think a consultant for Hawthorne Bank. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you have quite a story to tell that goes back to mom and dad and your dad's work ethic and everything else that helped develop into this whole situation. And you certainly, with the Bank of Blue Valley, have come a long way since a double wide on 119th and Metcalf across from the Quick Trip, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it was quite a ride. It was a good experience, and everything worked out well. It was hard work, but it was a fun ride. So.
Yeah, and you talk about hard work, and I think that goes back to your mom and dad, and especially your dad, former World War II guy, hard scrabble guy, tough guy, came up through the Depression. My father did the same thing, and I think those parents, called the greatest generation, which they were, it was an incredible experience to be one of their children, wasn't it?
Oh, it was, and again, that's a really important point, because growing up in that environment, our generation, that went through that. They went through some really tough times, and so they never took anything for granted. Everything had to be done. It had to be, there wasn't anything left on the table. You had to make it for yourself, and. My dad was just that guy. He was a very ambitious guy and wanted to do a lot of things. And really, there wasn't anything he didn't feel like he could do. So it was a great opportunity. And being his son, and one of his three kids,
right.
He really he spent a lot of time with us trying to make sure that we were going in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, of course, Vic Jr., your brother, and your sister as well, Kathy. The siblings with your dad. And I think, everybody ended up having a college education and being very, very successful. Your dad came up through wartime, and he was at Gulfport, Mississippi, where he met Helen, his wife, and who was a nurse librarian.
She was a librarian.
She was a librarian.
He was the base librarian, and he was a guy that my dad was not he wasn't a prude or anything, but he didn't drink very much. He didn't, he was kind of he came from an environment where he worked most of the time. Mm-hmm. So, when he was growing up, and so he ended up when the guys would go, grab a beer on Friday nights, he'd kind of slide away, and every once in a while he'd go to the library, just for lack of some place to go, and that's where he met my mother.
Yeah, right. And she was actually the widow of a D-Day casualty, right?
Exactly.
Which was,
that's right.
It's amazing how life works.
That's right. No, the way it works, because she got married. She lived in upstate New York and went to Syracuse University. Married her high school and college boyfriend, and that was right before the war. Right before D-Day, they got married. He was in the D-Day incursion when they went into Europe, and he died on Utah Beach. And so, kind of just really as much as anything as a spirit of patriotism, she joined the Navy as a naval librarian. Wow. And was assigned to this little place down in Gulfport, Mississippi. So.
And the rest is history, right? The rest is history. Right. And your dad was from here.
Right.
Okay, he went to Wyandotte High School and JCK Community College, right?
Yep. Though there's this great letter out there that from the chancellor of the Kansas City, Kansas Community College. It's a great letter because my dad, he went through he got through his first year, and but he was always working. And in the letter, it says to my grandmother, it says, Vic's a good student. He's a good young man, but he just works too much. He says he's got to pay attention to his studies. And he said, I'm going to give him one more semester to get through because I'm doing this out of the graciousness of my heart, to try to help him get a degree. And he got one more semester and he didn't make it. Yeah. So he says, I'm done. I'm finished.
But he was a carpenter. Yeah. And he had his heart set on bigger and better things. And he started to build homes, right?
Right. Exactly.
And the interesting part, I think it was right along 95th Street.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was right along 95th Street, and I think he built his first home in that area. And it was funny about, I think you tell the story about Sundays with farmers and drinking lemonade.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No. We would go, actually, when he was trying to buy land,
Yes.
there was a guy by the name, his name was Matty Fluke, F-L-U-K. And he lived on Antioch there about 127th Street. His house was right there on the street. And so we would go out there. And I remember going out there at least 3 or 4 times, maybe more. And we would sit in Maddie's front room, kind of in the, in the formal dining or living room. And he would talk to him about corn and about, about crops and everything
soybeans
else.
Or
soybeans or whatever. and the only thing we were supposed to do is not get into trouble. I mean, we had to just sit there and be, proper and prim. And we'd just come from church, so we were all in our Sunday finest. But he would do that, and he got to be good friends with Maddie. And he had 4 quarter sections, and he ended up buying 3 of the 4 quarter sections from Maddie. And and that's where the Home Depot is and all that other stuff.
Yeah, right. And he also started the Ranchmart Shopping Center, correct?
That's right.
Your dad? I mean,
Yep.
he came from humble beginnings. His mom and dad came up through the Depression. Your dad came up through the Depression. I think you talk about the story where he had to move like 12 times.
Oh, yeah.
And he was 15 years old. Then he moved 12 times a year to stay ahead of the rent,
Right.
meaning we couldn't make the rent, so we had to move to a different place. And, I mean, you talk about these stories and how some of these people survived and what they did to survive. And then you realize how much of an impact, not only did it have on him, but then the impact that he passed on to his kids as well.
Yeah, one of the kind of poignant stories, I worked for the Baltimore Bank, and Baltimore Bank, became Boatman's. And then, in 1986, Boatman's was purchased the Charter Corp, which was the First National Bank. And so, that all came, and it was a big deal. And I was the executive vice president of Baltimore at that point in time, or Boatman's. And I called my dad, and I was really excited. I said, "This is a great opportunity. We're going to merge these 2 big banks, and it's a great opportunity for me." And he said, "Bob, this is the worst day of my life." I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "This is great." And he said, "You don't remember, or you don't know." He says, First National Bank foreclosed on my family and threw us out on the street.
Oh, my God.
And he said, "I can't believe that my son is going to work for the First National Bank." So that would just caught me completely by surprise.
I bet you were floored.
Yeah, but anyway, it was, and that, of course, that was a great opportunity for me as well. And he got over that, but it was, going through that, it really tests you. And I think some people give up. And other people just, hunker down and just, they work their way through it. And my dad was one of the
he really did.
latter.
He never did give up, never quit, which was part of his background and work ethic from his mom and dad probably. Mm-hmm. And then the military probably had a lot to do with that as well.
Right.
But you talk about I think when you get out of school, I'm not sure what you were thinking. You went to K-State.
Right.
And you eventually get UMKC and you get your advanced degree there. But when you came out of college, I'm not sure what you thought. Maybe I'll go to work for Dad, or maybe I'll do this. I think Dad taught you a real quick lesson early on, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. I did a couple of interviews in college, but I knew I was going to go work for my dad. I mean, he had a lot going on, and I wanted to be part of that. And but he got there, and the very first day he put me down in a ditch, digging a ditch, and I'm just down there.
You give me your diploma, I'm going to give you a shovel.
And so I did that for about 2 or 3 weeks, and every day we would drive. I mean, I lived at home, and so he would drive to work in his pickup truck, and we'd talk on the way, and we would, we were down there, and we were actually building right where O'Neill's is now. That was the ditch that I was in the middle of, and so we were building that every day. It started to rain, and and he said it's not going to rain very long, so we'd just keep working, and then it would really rain hard, and he said, "We're already wet, just keep going," No, he just was, he was a get it done guy, but. as you kind of alluded to, and one of those trips to work one day, I said, Dad, what am I going to do something other than dig a ditch? And he said, Bobby, you're not doing a very, very good job of digging. You got to get, you got to learn this business from the ground up, literally. and I said, well, I'm not sure I want to do that. And he said, well, Bob, you don't have to work here. But he says, if you're in bed when I get up in the morning, you're going to work with me. And he says, as long as you're working in my house, you're going to work every day. And so I ended up getting a job working for my college roommate's father at Southwest Steel Fabricating in Bonner Springs as a welder.
Yeah, well, sure. Like any of us, I think, they'd say, well, if you're not up when I get up, you're going to work with me. Well, I'm sure there were a few mornings where he probably got up. He left for work, and Bob went back to bed.
That's right. No, I would get up and leave and then come back because I
made sure he was out of the house.
Exactly. But like I said, it was all he was that greatest generation. I mean, it was all business for him, and he always did things that he thought were in my best interest. He wanted to make me a stronger guy. I always laughed at if he'd born a little bit later, on that music or that song, A Boy Named Sue. He didn't name me Sue. Anything to make me stronger and better.
Yeah, so. Tougher. Yeah, that's awesome. And you really didn't when you started in the banking business. I think with Boatman or Baltimore,
right,
and then eventually Bowman's. I read somewhere where you were the teller for the safe deposit room. Was that your initial job? You're talking about you started at the bottom of the banking industry as well.
Well, that to even put an exclamation point on that. Yeah, I was the clerk in the safe deposit box. So if you had to get your safe deposit box, you'd come in, you'd give me your key, you'd sign the card, and I'd go in there and get your box out and help you do that. And so I did that, and it was an incredibly boring job. And I was looking to go. I was going to go to law school. I had to do something because this thing was a dead-end job. And then one day, there was an older African-American gentleman who was really the nicest guy in the world. I used to do his tax return every year, but he was the porter for the bank. That's what the old days. Mm-hmm. And they had this, remember that the front door of the thing, they had a
man, they had a doorman.
A doorman, and then they had a thing with sand in it where you put your cigarettes in there as you came in. And one day somebody knocked that over, and he was off that day. So they called me to go clean it up. So I knew exactly where I was. I was just slightly ahead of him. I was at the bottom of the totem pole. So.
Yeah, we'll talk about then working your way up through that. And then the idea of founding your own bank, which is a fascinating story in its own right. But talk about coming up, and you learned everything from the bottom up, didn't you?
Oh, I did. I worked there for 19 years at the it was Baltimore, and then it became Boatman's, and then became Boatman's First National. And, when it all merged together, it was a big institution, and Ted, my boss had said, we need to specialize more. We're much bigger now, and I used to do everything. I was the operations guy, and I did the mortgages, I did consumer lending, I did everything, and I was kind of I was the number 2 guy at the bank. And he said, you got to specialize. And I said, well, I don't want to give up the customer side of things, and I don't want to just do the administrative things. And I want to do both. I can do both. I mean, I have the ability to do both. And and that's kind of what happened in the long run. He said, well, you've got to pick one. And he said, we got a bunch of guys that do the customer stuff, and you're the only one that knows all the administrative stuff. So we want you to be the chief administrative officer. And I said, I don't want to do that. I want to, I'd been thinking about the bank idea for a while, and my dad was going to help me and get that started. And so I filed for a bank charter in 1989 and got it approved and opened in December of that year. So.
Yeah. So, and your father, you probably took a lesson almost from your dad. Your dad, when he got his first loan, he got it from his father-in-law.
Yeah.
Right. So neither one of you guys actually got it from a bank.
Right. Exactly. No. It was and we ended up. In the very end result. In my mother, they were a great couple. I mean, they complemented each other. She was a Phi Beta Kappa, and my dad, didn't have a college.
Vic and Helen.
So they, but at the very end there, I had to raise, and this was long time ago because you couldn't do this today. But I raised $2,100,000 in capital to start the bank. And I wanted my dad to be a shareholder because, frankly, he'd be a big customer if he became a shareholder. And at the very end, I got it all done. I said, Dad, I got that last little piece that I've saved for you. And I said, I've got it all raised. And I said, we're going to move ahead with this thing. And he said, Bob, I'm so proud of you. You've done such a great job that he says, I think I want this to be yours. So I don't want to be part of it. So you go ahead and get that last little piece sold off to somebody else.
Yeah.
And I was just crestfallen because I just thought, oh my God, that was part of my plan was to have him part of this because he would be a nice base of business to build off of. And that was we were just sitting across the kitchen table, and my mother, she said, well, and she had some money from her father when he passed away, and she said, I think we ought to invest in Bobby's bank. And he says, if you don't want to do it, I'll do it. And he looked at her. It was probably the first time she'd ever, crossed him. And he said, well, honey, they said, Helen, if you feel that strongly about it, I guess we can make an investment.
Okay. So they did.
And they did, and the
thanks
rest
to
is
Helen,
history.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then the interesting thing where did you go to friends that you knew in the business or from the banking at Baltimore and Boatman's or in First National? Did you have friends that you knew were interested in backing you in opening bank? Because it's not an easy thing to do.
Right. No, it is hard to
bank.
do. As a matter of fact, at that point in time, it was considered a pretty risky investment. But literally, I went to part of my job and the thing that I did probably the best is to work with brand new businesses that were getting started and startup businesses and businesses that were growing. Right. And so I literally went back to my best customers and said, I helped you get started. I want you to help me.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So.
Oh, the old guilt.
Yeah.
That works.
That was probably 50% of my deposit base, or 50% of my customers and investors were guys that I'd done business with.
And so then they became not only investors, but they were customers as well. Exactly. So they helped the bottom line.
Right.
In the first, and we talked about this right off the top, your first branch was a double wide trailer.
That's right.
At 119th and Metcalf.
Right.
You think about that, and the Bank of Blue Valley was there. Then you ended up raising a building there. But if everyone knows where the Quick Trip is, across from Rosanna Square, right?
Right, exactly.
That is exactly where it is. It's across the street there.
Yeah, no, I mean, and literally the day we opened for business, the Quick Trip was open. And then we had this little thing, but that was the only thing on that entire corner, the Walmart, the Rosanna Square, all this stuff. There was 5 corners there. There was nothing on any of one of those corners.
And then nothing south of you.
Oh, nothing.
I mean, there was all dirt roads.
Exactly.
South, right?
But it was, I knew from, all my research that 119th Street was going to be a great street. And I knew, obviously, Metcalf was a great street. So it was a good corner. And UMB ended up going across the street from us, and so it was a good place to start. And although that was another story, man. When I ended up buying the ground, I couldn't buy the corner. The guy that I was dealing with, Irv Maislish over at Leo Eisenberg and Company, and I said I want the corner, and he says you can't afford the corner, Bob. He said it's worth more than what you're going to be willing to pay, and so. I said, there's another spot next to that. And he said, no, that one's too expensive, too. That's right on 119th Street. I'll sell you the piece that's just south of that. And he says it's a little bit bigger and it allows you to build a building on top of it. But it was also kind of, there was a big ravine that went through that. So it was a tough piece of dirt. And again, my dad, when he found out that I had signed a contract to buy that, and he said, Bob, he says, you've insulted me because he says everybody says Regnier bought that piece of property. They think it was me, and they think I'm stupid. Nobody would want to buy that piece of property. Why wouldn't you buy the corner? So anyway, we had a lot of interesting conversations.
Yeah, right. Especially when he could go look at the piece of land and go, no, you don't want that piece of land because of his background, right?
Right.
And you were born and raised in Blue Valley in Johnson County, and you went all through the Blue Valley schools, right?
Yeah, no, actually, I was a Shawnee Mission kid. So
I'm sorry, you went to Shawnee Mission. You're
that's right. I was a Shawnee Mission kid.
But you knew Johnson County.
Oh yeah,
was going to be big. Yeah.
That's right. No, but and I looked at Johnson County. It was primed to continue to grow dramatically, and that's why I just thought that was a great place to start a bank.
Yeah, right. And it ended up being a great place to start a bank. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so as you go through all this and you're starting to build and whatever, and you're starting to think about where this all can go. What was your dream? What did you have as your ultimate dream? I know opening a bank was the first thing you had, but then after that, what was your mantra about who we're going to loan money to and who we're not going to loan money to and all that sort of thing?
Well, I was always a small business guy. My dad was obviously a home builder, so I thought I knew that industry. And it's a tough industry, but it's also a good industry. It was a growing industry in Johnson County. So we did a lot of residential construction. We did a lot of residential development. And just concentrated on small businesses. And that area was growing, and so the whole mantra of the organization was to just get out there and be part of the community. And we also concentrated and felt very strongly that we had to have a community presence as well, because we were a community bank. And I don't know, that almost kind of felt right to do. I'm not sure that was even a strategy, but that was also a way for me to get to know more people. Right. And I was on a committee at the school board, ended up getting elected to the school board. So all those things made me connections, within the community, and that was part of the strategy. Is just to stay connected to the community, and you'd meet more people.
Yeah, and community is about housing. Yep. And about being able to afford a house.
Yep.
Whereas, this day and age, it's really difficult for a young couple, especially if they try to do it on one income, to afford a house. Okay?
Right.
They just aren't, and that's why you see so many buildings going up that are apartments.
Sure.
Okay, and I think that as much as that housing is needed for people to be able to get into, have a roof over their head, it does not help really build a community. There's a lot of transients in apartments. Right. Whereas if you're in a home and then you buy a home on the entry level and you have 2 or 3 kids and then you move to the next level, okay, that's what you want, because that helps build the community. And that was part of what you really had in mind when you opened the bank.
Absolutely. And that was one of the things my dad always said. And, my dad was not a super sophisticated guy. He was a basic guy, but he said, housing is a stabilizing influence in the community. If you rent someplace, you're just living there on somebody else's property. But he said, you own your own piece of property. You've got an investment in the community, and it makes for a much stronger community. And I believe that's true. And I think that's one of the problems we've got right now is we've got to create an environment where people can own a piece of the community so that they can own their own home. And I think that's really, really tough in today's market.
Yeah, it is. So you go through, and I know you lost your father in 2000, I believe, from brain cancer. And I know that must have been a very, very tough situation. But when he dies, and then your mom, I think, passed away about 5 years later.
That's right. That's right.
But when your dad died, I guess there was no will. There was no. Your dad. He had a big business.
He did.
He was an extremely successful man. So all of a sudden now your dad dies, and there's no will, and there's no financial. There's nothing in there, and you and your siblings had to go through all this and go, how are we going to do this without giving most of that money that we inherited back to the government? How are we going to do this, and what can we do to try to improve our community at the same time?
Yeah, we were faced with some really very tough decisions that had to be made very quickly, because this was actually in the latter, probably last 30 days of my father's life, and he had some good people that he had worked with, and they gave us some good advice. But we really had one big decision to make. We could basically not do anything, and ended up making a very, very large check to the government, or we could do some creative things and actually create this foundation that has been that was absolutely the right thing to do, but it has worked out better than I think any of us ever thought that it would. But we ended up creating this foundation with the help of the Greater Kansas City Community Foundation, who, by the way, are some of the greatest partners you could ever have. I mean, they facilitate things like this, for families. But we ended up starting the foundation. He owed the Community Foundation a lot of money because they ended up owning a third of the company, and then we bought it back over the next 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So it was like I said, great partners, but we ended up with a nice foundation that has allowed us to do some really great things within the community. And I think that my dad would have been happy about that.
Yeah, right. Right, because his name was attached to something that you didn't ruin.
Right, exactly.
But it's the V&H Foundation.
Right.
Vic and Helen, of course, and you do some tremendous things. You've been Entrepreneur of the Year. You've also been, the Philanthropist of the Year. I know those things are very near and dear to your heart. You're a very private guy. You don't like to boast about those things, but you have done some tremendous work. Just talk a little bit about the foundation and some of the areas that you have helped through the foundation.
Well, and I tell you that giving away money is not an easy thing to do. I mean, there's a real responsibility there. And I learned a little bit about that when I was at the First National Bank, and I was on the trust committee, and the guys that were running that would complain. They said, this is hard because, you've got 10, requests, and you don't get do 3 of them, and you're going to have to pick, and all of them are worthwhile. And so, it was difficult. We talked about it a lot. We tried to have a strategic approach to it. That didn't really work because, first of all, my brother and sister and I are 3 different people. My older brother, younger sister. We all had 3 different views of things, but we knew that my dad really cared for children, and because we had a long-standing connection to Wonderscope over in Shawnee, and that was one of my dad's first things. My dad was very, very interested in education. He was the one that started the working with the science fair for a competition.
Yeah, for the kids.
For the kids.
And my daughters were involved.
And so so science, education. Children's issues, those were the things that we tried to focus on, and that's actually been the bulk of our giving has been in those general areas. A lot in education because, and frankly, we've given money to KU and K-State both because my sister went to KU, my brother and I went to K-State, but we've also given a lot of money to the community college because that would my dad would have really been happy about that because he really felt that the people that went to community college were people that were, they were trying to make a better life for themselves, and they really were, they studied things that they were get right in the middle of doing. And,
right. Instead of going through a lot of extracurriculars and electives and all this sort of stuff, they're right in like nursing and all those things. And also, mom, I think she was a librarian.
That's right.
So she used to read you a lot, and so I think that had a lot to do with the education. And your dad, I think, was always disappointed he didn't graduate from KCK Community College. I think that bothered him a little bit, although he was out working 2 jobs for his family in order to make ends meet at the same time.
Right. No. It was it was a tough environment. His dad was a union carpenter. His mother worked as a nurse at KU and also worked at the Loose Wells Biscuit Company. Dipping chocolates.
Sure.
And, so they had to make every dollar work.
Yeah.
And he was a hardworking guy. I mean, he the whole time I was growing up, he worked 7 days a week, 364 days a year. He stayed home on Christmas. But on Christmas, we always had a project. We'd either lay carpet or we would retile the bathroom or something. So he had a project for Christmas afternoon. So not to ruin the day,
You knew it was coming. Okay, you can open all these things. I know we're going to have a lot of wrapping paper in the living room, but by noon, the meal's going to be over, and you're going to be out laying carpet somewhere,
exactly.
Right? Or cleaning out a house that I've got going for the carpenters who are going to come back in on the day after Christmas.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah, so that's really interesting. I'd love to be a fly on the wall sometime when you and your 2 siblings get together, and you sit around a dining room table and you try to figure out the will and trust and where, not the will and trust, but philanthropy. Where are we going to go this year? So that must be an interesting conversation, right?
No, it is. I mean, my brother lives in California. He's a professor at the University of Southern California,
right?
And very successful in primarily the elderly housing sector of architecture. And my sister works here in town. She was the one that actually worked for my dad. After both of us, my brother and I, went on to our own separate careers.
Right.
And
she sort of sacrificed, didn't she?
She did.
Wasn't she a foreign language student at KU? Was that right?
She was a French major. And
French major, yeah.
She was my parents' primary caregiver in the last 10 years of their life.
God bless her.
Yeah, God bless her. She did hard work, and she's a good person. We fight, but
siblings. Of course,
we're siblings.
Yeah, and she ended up taking over the Ace Hardware situation right there at Ranchmart, correct?
That's right.
Branded all that and did all that stuff. So yeah. She really did yeoman's work. It's it is a special person who can take care of the elderly, especially if they're your mom and dad and you're going through some really tough times. Okay, how'd you meet Ann? And I'm sure when we talk to Ann, she'll have a very different version of this story.
She will.
But you could.
I embellished it maybe just a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead. No problem at all. Yeah.
No, actually, so Ann ended up coming to work for the Baltimore Bank.
Okay.
She was back in those days, the bank actually printed its own checks. So if you open an account, they go upstairs and they have a little printing press upstairs and they print off a bunch of checks and give them to you. So she was we called it the thrifty check girl. So she printed all the thrifty checks, and but she did other things for the bank as well. She was working in our credit department and other stuff. But that's where I first met her. We went. I knew her, but I didn't know her that well. Mm-hmm. But the first time we ever had a quote unquote date, we both ended up going separately to the bank's Christmas party.
Oh boy!
And so we ended up after that, going out, out for a drink after that with another couple from the bank. So so that was our first date, so to speak. And,
okay.
And then we got better acquainted as we went on. And then she left the bank. I stayed there, but she left and actually went to St. Louis, worked for the Department of Commerce in St. Louis, and then she moved back to Kansas City. And when she moved back, we got back together.
Okay,
we got serious.
Did you try the long distance romance, or when she left,
she was gone. I mean, she would.
I
was. There's another funny story about this. I'm sure it's appropriate for this, but I mean, one of my my best friends. I was despondent because she was the girl of my dreams, and she was leaving, and so we went down to the bar right there at in Westport.
Kelly's?
Kelly's. We went to Kelly's. And so we sat there, and he says, "Bob, I'm going to help you through this, and this is my best friend, quote, air quotes." But so we just sit there, and he would just get these shots of tequila, and he'd put one in front of him and one in front of me, and he says, "Bob, I'm buying, so just, let's just get through this together." So he would do that, and he did that like we were on our third or fourth or fifth round, and boy, I was really getting bad, but he was doing just fine. He was getting water in his and good tequila in mine.
I bet it was red. It was taking care of you. My good buddy, Red Cross, yeah.
But anyway, I got through that, and and I lived to tell. And that one was, I was lucky to get home that night. But
I'll bet.
But anyway, I was that was. I just said, hey, that chapter ended, and then when she came back to town, I was the first to give her a call and say, hey, we need to get.
And
back
how'd
together.
you find out she was moving back?
Oh, some friends, said that she'd worked over there for about a year or a year and a half, and she had the opportunity to move back to Kansas City, and she didn't really like St. Louis particularly, and she decided.
None of us do.
None of us do.
We don't like Kansas City that much.
Even the ball teams.
No, we don't like any of the ball teams. They end up losing all their NFL franchises anyway. So that's them. And then talk about Katie, Sam, and Ben, your kids, and I know you have 7 grandkids as well.
That's right.
I know you're a proud granddad. So
absolutely. Awesome. No, I'm very incredibly proud of my kids. I mean, my daughter, the oldest one, is actually she worked for the city of KCMO for about 10 years, and she was their big data person. So she did data research for the city and tried to help improve the use of data to do a better job with the city. And then she left and started her own company to do that kind of work for smaller cities and also do strategic planning and do some marketing things. So I'm really proud of her. She's got 2 kids in town, and she's a center city person. She wants to be part of the city, so she lives over
potholes and all.
Yeah, potholes and all. She lives at 29th and Campbell, and the daughter goes to Lincoln, and so she's just, and they're really great kids. So I enjoy them. I got my middle son is an architect down in San Diego. He's got 3 kids.
Yeah,
he works for.
And your brother was an architect. Right?
My brother was an architect,
right?
and you know
Did Sam go to K-State as well?
No. So nobody went to K-State. My daughter went to Brown.
That sounds like my kids.
Yeah, no, she went to Brown.
Well, she went to Ivy League. So
yeah, right. And then she went to and got her master's at NYU, and then my son Ben went to Rice, and then he ended up going. He met a girl there from California, so girls always take their husbands home, so he ended up going to California with him. And then my son Sam went to USC and on a scholarship to
They all got out of town.
They all got out of town, and so he met a young lady there, and she's from Brazil actually, or was born in Brazil, but. And they have 2 kids, but they're both in education now. They're both. He works for a independent school district. So
yeah, Sam still in California.
Still in California.
Yeah, still, and then Ben's in.
He's in San Diego.
He's in San Diego, but Katie stayed home.
Yep.
So Katie's the favorite child.
Well, of course she is. No. I love all of them, but I'm incredibly proud of her, primarily because she went out on her own. I mean, that just takes a lot. And her husband's starting his new business, this weekend. Actually, he's the one that's starting the Museum of Barbecue.
Absolutely.
So anyway,
we have them on our list that we will be doing. In fact, coming up in May, that's the barbecue month. That's the month of barbecue, or whatever they call it.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's that. Oh, so that's it. Well, we'll be.
He's
talking
a great guy,
yeah.
and he's a good father, but also he's a very entrepreneurial guy.
Yeah, and we do have a lot of great things going on here. So, and I think you're very, very proud of this city. This is your hometown. So talk a little bit about Kansas City, what it means to you. And you could have opened your bank anywhere. I know you do open it with friends and you knew people. So we're going to be based here. But you could now, you're sort of retired. And I know you're still a consultant for Hawthorne. But you can live anywhere in the world for all practical purposes. A lot better weather in a lot of other parts of the world, okay? But you live and remain here, and also you're so entrepreneurial and also so philanthropic and the whole thing. What is it about this city for you?
Well, I just, when we first talked, I started thinking about that, and I thought a lot about it because I ended up back here because this is where I grew up, but the more I got involved in banking, the more I met people and then got engaged in philanthropy. Even when I was at the Baltimore Bank, that was the guy that my first charitable thing was I headed the United Way campaign for the bank, and you get engaged in some of those things, and it just becomes part of you. And I also there's no question in my mind that the Midwest is a good place to have a job, have a family, and enjoy, because it's just a better environment. I mean, again, I've been to the East Coast and I've been to the West Coast, and I've been all over. And this is just it's a great town, and part of it, the longer you're here, the more you make connections, and I just don't want to leave any of those connections and those people that I've gotten to know over the years. But I also look around and I think this is a great place to raise a family and to do many good things. So I just loved it. I very much enjoyed being in Johnson County. I think we've got a great environment out there. We've got some great cities. I'm very proud of the city of Kansas City, Missouri, and actually doing some work over in Wyandotte County as well. So it's a great city. When I was the head of the Greater Kansas City Chamber for a couple of years, a long time ago, and I got a shirt that was really a great shirt that I should have been our city motto, and it says "Too much city for just one state." And it was that was the motto. I mean, we were always talking about cooperation across the state line, but we really have a great city, and that part of the reason why I'm connected to UMKC now, and the head of the chairman of the foundation down there. Every good city has to have a great university, and we've got UMKC, we've got Rockhurst, we've got the KCUMB up north. I mean,
we've got a great community college.
Great community college. I mean, on both sides,
right.
Metropolitan and Johnson County and Wyandotte County. So we do have great environment. All of those things need to be fostered. I mean, we need to make sure that they're going all the right direction. We're making a change with the chancellor at Johnson County Community College, and that was a very important hire. I think they've got a really good man that's coming in there to take over that. So those are very important elements in the growth of any city. And
Yes.
I think we've got a lot of those pieces here. And it's just working with them, fostering them, helping them, advising them. Right. Some of them are, I'm pretty engaged with a lot of the political leaders particularly on the Kansas side, but to a certain extent on the Missouri side. And I just think we have this great environment. We need to foster it. We need to build it. We need to make it better. It's never the best that it can be. It can always be a little bit better.
Yeah, it can. And the other thing is too, educating them and then keeping them here,
Yes.
keeping our best and brightest.
Oh, absolutely.
Without going to the east or west coast. I think after you were born and raised here and live here for a long enough time, I think a lot of them fly.
Right.
And then all of a sudden they turn around and go, you know what? Kansas City wasn't so bad after. I think I'm going to go back home.
Well, and that's why one of the things we did down at UMKC was to create the Regnier Venture Creation Challenge,
Right.
And that's coming up in about a month here. It was to try to spur entrepreneurship within Kansas City, because there's a lot of people when you go to college anymore. I think there's a lot of young people. Some of them want to go work for a big bank or a
Sure.
big insurance company or a big accounting firm, but a lot of them have an idea that they want to work for themselves.
Yeah.
And creating a program that helps people along that journey. And they've got some great Casey SourceLink. There's a bunch of really great assets in Kansas City that help people start their own businesses.
Yeah, and you do too, because you have to loan those people money,
Absolutely.
trusting them to pay it back.
Yeah, and
So that's the
those are not
important thing.
easy loans to make. to
No,
be
they
honest
aren't.
with you. No,
exactly.
but
Especially nowadays, I think it's probably even harder than it
Yeah.
used to be, right?
yeah.
Well, the Regnier family, iconic name here in Kansas City, and we're so glad to have you in. It'll go on forever. You're the legend and the family name. Long live. You have the V&H Foundation, and then the Regnier Family Foundation is what you're doing. Great work here, and I know you love it here. And it's very, very important. But thanks so much, and thanks for being on our show. And as you know, there's just something about Kansas City.
There is just something about Kansas City, and I'm all about that.
There's Just Something About Kansas City is a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization with the mission of documenting the stories that have built our city to inspire and educate generations to come. Our work is being made possible by the generous support of local partners like you. You can help us share these stories by becoming a sponsor today. Visit somethingaboutKC.org to learn more.